At first glance, it looked harmless, almost comforting. A faded family photograph, the kind you'd expect to find tucked inside an old album or framed on a dusty shelf. A mother and father seated at the center, two children standing close, their faces frozen in the stiff half-smiles common to early photography. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just a moment captured in time. That's what everyone thought, until someone looked closer. The photograph resurfaced online decades after it was taken, shared in a small forum dedicated to old and forgotten images. No dramatic caption, no warning, just a simple line. Found this in my grandmother's belongings. Does anyone notice something off? At first, the comments were polite and uninterested. People mentioned the clothing, guessed the decade, debated whether it was the 1940s or early 50s. A few joked about how serious people looked back then. Then someone zoomed in. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Near the youngest child's shoulder, where no arm should have been, there was a hand, pale, clearly human, fingers slightly curled as if resting gently on the child. But the problem wasn't the hand itself. The problem was that it didn't belong to anyone in the photo. No arm connected to it, no sleeve, no body positioned in a way that could explain it, just a hand emerging from nowhere. At first, people tried to rationalize it. Maybe a printing error, maybe someone moved during the long exposure time. Early cameras were notorious for blurring motion after all. But the hand wasn't blurred. It was sharp, detailed. The nails were visible, the knuckles clearly defined. Others suggested it was a trick of perspective, maybe a third child hidden behind the group. But when the brightness and contrast were adjusted, there was no body, no shoulder, no face, no hint of another person standing there. The original poster claimed something even stranger. No one in the family remembered a third child. As the image spread across social media, theories multiplied. Some said it was a double exposure, a common issue in early photography. Others argued it was a prank, digitally altered to spark attention. But experts in vintage photography pushed back. The grain, lighting, and shadow alignment didn't match known examples of manipulation from that era. Then the questions took a darker turn. Why did the hand appear to be touching the child? Why were the fingers positioned so naturally, almost protectively? And most unsettling of all, why did the child's expression seem different once you noticed it?
People began to point out that while the parents looked calm, the children didn't. The older sibling's eyes appeared tense, focused on something just outside the frame. The younger child, the one nearest the hand, had a face that was difficult to describe. Not exactly scared, not exactly calm, more like aware, as if they knew something the others didn't. More digging revealed that the family lived near a rural town with a long history of unexplained disappearances. Old newspaper clippings mentioned missing neighbors, strange sounds at night, and local folklore about unseen watchers. Stories most people dismissed as superstition. But once the photo went viral, former residents of the town started commenting, quietly at first, then more openly. One comment stood out above the rest. "My grandmother warned us about taking photos there. She said sometimes they show up even when you can't see them." No one knew who they were. And that's when the photo stopped being just a photo and became something else entirely. Because if the hand truly belonged to no one visible, the question wasn't how it got into the picture, but what was standing there when the photo was taken. We'll trace the origins of the photograph and uncover why the family suddenly stopped taking pictures altogether. Tracking the origin of the photograph wasn't easy. The original post disappeared within days, and the user account was deleted without explanation. But by then, screenshots had already spread across forums, Reddit threads, and private research groups. Digital archivists began doing what they do best, digging backward. The first solid lead came from a barely visible detail in the background of the photo, a slanted wooden beam and a distinctive window frame. An architectural historian recognized it as a farmhouse style common in the American Midwest during the early 1930s. Narrowing it down further, the design matched homes built near one specific rural county, isolated, sparsely populated, and largely forgotten. Records showed that the family likely lived on the edge of that county, miles from the nearest town. Census data confirmed the parents' names and the existence of 2 children. Only 2. No missing siblings, no relatives living with them at the time. And then the trail went cold. No family portraits after that year, no holiday photos, no school pictures preserved in public records. It was as if the family collectively decided to stop documenting their lives. That alone was strange, but not unheard of. What made it disturbing was why. A local librarian from the area eventually came forward, responding anonymously to a forum thread. She claimed the house in the photo had a reputation, one locals avoided even decades later. According to her, families who lived there never stayed long. Some left abruptly, others simply vanished from public records entirely. She also shared a piece of town folklore rarely written down. Locals believed the land itself was occupied, not haunted in the traditional sense, no rattling chains or shadow figures, but something quieter, something observant, something that didn't like being acknowledged. They said if you ignored it, it ignored you, but if you noticed it, that's when it noticed you back. That belief might explain what happened next. A descendant of the family, someone who claimed to be the great-niece of the mother in the photograph, contacted a researcher privately. She said her family never talked about the farmhouse. When asked why there were no photos from that period, her grandmother gave a single answer every time. We were told not to invite anything into the picture. At first, it sounded metaphorical, like a superstition, but then she added something far more unsettling. Her grandmother believed that photographs didn't just capture light, they captured attention. According to her, after that one photo was taken, things inside the house changed. The youngest child began talking to someone no one else could see. Not imaginary friends, this was different. The child described someone who stood very close and liked holding hands. The parents noticed that the child often complained of cold fingers. Sometimes fingerprints would appear on fogged windows at the child's height, too small to belong to an adult, but not matching either of the children's hands. The mother reportedly tried to take another photograph months later, but when the film was developed, every image came back ruined. Faces blurred, shapes warped. One frame showed what looked like a smudge shaped like a palm pressed directly against the lens. That was the last time a camera was ever used in the house. Soon after, the family moved away without explanation. They never returned. And according to local property records, the farmhouse remained unoccupied for years, despite being structurally sound. No one wanted to live there, because once you saw what shared the space with you, it was already too late.
We'll examine the photograph itself under forensic analysis and uncover why experts say the hand wasn't added later, but was present the moment the shutter closed. When the image finally reached professional analysts, expectations were low. Most viral, creepy photos fall apart under scrutiny. Simple edits, lighting tricks, or pareidolia. This one didn't. The first examination focused on grain structure. Old photographs have a natural randomness in their grain, depending on the film stock and exposure. If an object is added later, even decades ago, it usually disrupts that pattern. The hand didn't. Its grain density matched the rest of the image perfectly. Then came shadow analysis.
The light source in the photo appeared to be natural daylight coming from the left side of the frame. The parents' faces, the children's clothing, even the folds in the fabric all followed the same lighting logic. And so did the hand. It cast a faint, consistent shadow, one that aligned precisely with the child's shoulder and collar. That detail alone ruled out most known forms of manipulation. Next, analysts examined depth of field. Early cameras had limited focus ranges. Objects too close or too far usually appeared soft or distorted. But the hand was in perfect focus, exactly where it would be if it were physically present beside the child at the moment the photo was taken. That's when the tone of the discussion shifted. Because if the hand wasn't added later, then it had to be there. Some experts suggested a long exposure artifact, someone stepping into the frame briefly and then stepping out. But that theory collapsed quickly. Long exposures cause ghosting, partial transparency, blurred edges. The hand was solid, defined, real. Almost too real. As the analysis deepened, a forensic imaging specialist noticed something chilling. The hand's proportions were slightly off, not enough to scream fake, but enough to feel wrong. The fingers were a bit longer than average, the joints bent at subtly unnatural angles, the thumb sat lower than expected, not monstrous, just unfamiliar. Then came the most disturbing discovery. When the contrast was increased and the image inverted, a common technique to reveal hidden details, faint pressure marks appeared on the child's clothing, tiny indentations where fingers would naturally press if a hand were resting there, meaning the hand wasn't hovering, it was touching. Even more unsettling, the child's shoulder fabric showed tension, pulled slightly downward as if weight were being applied. Not much, just enough to suggest contact. No other person in the photo was positioned to do that. At this point, skeptics began to drop out of the conversation, not because they believed anything supernatural, but because they couldn't explain what they were seeing. Then someone noticed the child's eyes. At normal brightness, the expression seemed neutral, but when enhanced, the child's pupils appeared unusually dilated, not fear-wide, not relaxed, dilated in a way often associated with intense focus or heightened awareness, as if the child was concentrating on something very close, something the camera captured, but human eyes couldn't. More records from the town began to surface. A school attendance log showed the child was withdrawn shortly after the photo was taken. The reason listed wasn't illness. It simply said, "no longer attending." No follow-up, no transfer records, just absence. And absence, it seemed, followed that child everywhere. Because when you look closely at the photograph now, there's a detail most people miss. The child's hand, the one being held, is not relaxed. The fingers are curled inward, not reaching, but gripping back. We'll uncover why children in that region were often warned never to hold hands with someone they couldn't see, and what happened to those who did. Long before the photograph resurfaced, before forums and analysts and viral theories, there were warnings, not written anywhere official, not taught in schools. They were the kind of rules passed quietly from adult to child, half whispered, half dismissed as bedtime superstition. In that rural county, children were told one thing above all else: never hold hands with someone you can't see.
Most kids didn't understand it. They laughed it off. Parents never explained further. They just repeated the rule, their voices tightening every time the question why was asked. Local historians later traced this warning back generations. It appeared in journals, personal letters, and oral accounts dating back over 100 years, always phrased differently, always vague, but always centered around the same idea: invisible companions. One former resident, now in his 80s, recalled his childhood vividly. He said there were places near the woods where children would suddenly stop walking, stare into empty space, and refuse to move. They'd say someone was standing there, he explained,
Not in front of them, not behind them, right beside them. Most of the time, the moment passed. The child would blink, shake their head, and keep walking, but sometimes they'd reach out. That's when adults intervened, often forcefully. In archived church records, several incidents were documented without explanation. Children collapsing in fits of panic, sudden muteness lasting weeks, night terrors so severe families sought help from clergy instead of doctors. One entry, dated decades before the photograph, described a child who claimed someone cold and gentle held their hand during prayers. The next morning, the child woke with bruises around their wrist, finger-shaped but too long to be human. That child disappeared from the records shortly after. When investigators connected these accounts back to the family in the photograph, a pattern began to emerge. The youngest child, the one nearest the mysterious hand, was the same age as many others mentioned in the stories, always between 4 and 6, always described as quiet, observant, or sensitive, as if they could perceive something adults couldn't. According to the descendant who spoke anonymously, the family's move away wasn't planned. It happened overnight. Neighbors woke to find the house empty, furniture left behind, dishes still in the sink. The parents took only what they could carry, and the children. But even after they left, the youngest child was never the same. Family letters revealed fragments of concern, mentions of the child waking up, holding their hand as if someone had just let go, complaints of cold spots in warm rooms, repeated drawings of a figure that never had a face, only an arm reaching downward. Doctors offered explanations: anxiety, trauma, overactive imagination, but none could explain why the child refused to let go of one specific fear. They insisted that if they let go, the hand would come back. Stranger still, the child reportedly said the hand wasn't trying to hurt them. It just didn't want to be alone. That sentence appears nowhere in official records, only in a private letter written by the mother years later, a letter never sent, found folded inside a book on grief. And then there's the detail no one noticed until much later. In the photograph, the hand's fingers are not wrapped tightly. They're positioned like someone waiting for permission, waiting for a response, waiting for the child to decide whether to hold on or let go. We'll examine chilling reports of what happened when children did let go, and why some said the hand never truly released them at all.
These letters raise an unsettling question. If the hand wasn't malicious, why was its presence so persistent and unyielding? The child's words give a chilling clue. According to the diary, the hand didn't want to hurt me, it just didn't want to be alone. What kind of presence needs to maintain contact so insistently that letting go becomes a terrifying risk? And what does that imply about the other children in the region who were never photographed or never spoke of their experiences? Some modern paranormal investigators suggest that the hand could be a remnant of someone or something trapped between worlds, a spirit or consciousness that exists in a liminal space, only partially perceivable, only capable of interacting with those who are sensitive or young enough to see it. Others propose a far darker possibility, a force that chooses its companions and refuses to release them, feeding on their attention and awareness, not their life, but their presence in the world. In the photograph itself, this tension is frozen in time. The hand isn't aggressive, but it isn't idle either. It hovers with an almost patient insistence, waiting for the child to respond. It is a subtle, invisible interaction, one only recognizable when you study the image carefully. And that, more than anything, seems to capture the true terror of the situation. The knowledge that some things are seen but not understood, and that contact, once made, may never truly end.
Those who have studied the farmhouse, the family, and similar cases warn of one thing above all: a hand that clings is not merely a curiosity. It is a signal, a warning, a choice. And for those who experience it, letting go may never be fully within their control. We'll explore the other photographs the family never took, and the strange, terrifying patterns that emerged in every image that was ruined or discarded. After the infamous photographs surfaced, researchers became obsessed with what came next, or more accurately, what didn't come next. Every other attempt to capture the family on film ended in disaster, leaving an eerie trail of ruined images that only added to the mystery. According to surviving family accounts, the mother attempted to photograph the children several months after the first hand photo. She wanted something normal, a simple portrait perhaps for a holiday card. But when the film was developed, the images were wrong. Faces blurred beyond recognition, shadows bent unnaturally. In one frame, the children's faces appeared stretched, almost elongated, and a faint hand seemed to hover just outside the frame, pressing against the edge of the lens. There was no body attached, just the same insistent presence that had appeared in the original photo. These aren't isolated anecdotes. Archival evidence and interviews with the family's descendants indicate a repeated pattern. Every camera brought disaster. Polaroids melted or bled during development. Film rolls were overexposed or completely blank. Even photos taken by neighbors, ones meant to be casual snapshots of birthday parties, turned out wrong. Sometimes a faint outline of an extra hand or arm appeared. Other times, a dark, unexplainable smudge seemed to interact with the children in subtle ways. It was as if the camera itself couldn't tolerate the presence of something unseen. Some modern forensic photographers suggest a physical explanation. Early cameras were sensitive to light, heat, and motion. Any small environmental disturbance, like a breeze through a curtain or a reflection from glass, could distort images. But in this case, nothing matched known distortions. The anomalies didn't behave randomly. They appeared deliberately, always near the children. The positioning, shadows, and perspective suggested interaction, not accident. And then there's the psychological layer. The children reportedly began to show signs of stress or fear when a camera was even nearby. The youngest child would hide, refuse to look at the lens, or sometimes grab the parent's hand, sometimes the wrong hand, as if instinctively trying to hold on to something unseen. Letters from the mother noted that the child's anxiety grew worse every time the family attempted a portrait, culminating in complete refusal to be photographed at all. By the time the family moved, the practice of taking pictures stopped entirely. The albums became incomplete, with entire years left undocumented. Relatives later reported that even old photographs borrowed from other family members often appeared altered when the child was in them. A hand seemed to reach from nowhere, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the eyes of the youngest child were sometimes unnaturally dilated or looking slightly to the side, as if acknowledging someone who wasn't there. The pattern wasn't limited to just one family. Research into the county's history revealed other households where children had unexplainable interactions with unseen presences. The common denominator? Many of the children had been photographed, sometimes once, sometimes repeatedly. In nearly every case, strange marks, extra shadows, or hands appeared in the resulting images. And in nearly every case, the children later described feeling watched or touched by something invisible. It seems that in that area, photographs weren't merely tools for memory. For reasons unknown, they acted as a bridge between the visible and the unseen, a medium through which some persistent, intangible presence could make itself known. And once captured, that presence rarely left. So the original photograph, with its hand hovering near the youngest child, wasn't just an anomaly. It was part of a repeating, documented phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. For the family, the consequences were terrifying but subtle. Fear, unease, and the unshakable feeling that the unseen hand would never truly let go. The camera had become a trap, a medium that could reveal what the naked eye could not. And that's when the chilling truth emerged. The hand was not only watching, it was learning. It observed the reactions of the children, adapted to their movements, and even seemed to anticipate when they might try to resist. Each failed photograph only reinforced its presence. Every attempted image became a silent record, not of the family, but of the hand itself.
It wasn't just a hand anymore. It was awareness. We'll delve into eyewitness accounts of what happened when neighbors and strangers attempted to photograph the family, and why some claim the hand reached beyond the original frame to interact with the outside world. The family's struggles with photographs weren't confined to their own attempts. Neighbors, friends, and even curious strangers who tried to capture images of the children reported unsettling experiences that only deepened the mystery. What began as innocent curiosity quickly spiraled into unease and, in some cases, terror. One neighbor, who lived across the dirt road from the farmhouse, attempted to take a casual snapshot of the children playing outside. The day was bright, the sun high, and everything seemed ordinary. But when he developed the film, he noticed something impossible. In every shot, a shadowy hand appeared just beyond the children's shoulders. It wasn't always in the same position, sometimes hovering near one child, sometimes reaching across both, but it was unmistakably human in shape. He swore no one else was present. Another person, a traveling photographer passing through the county, stopped to take what he considered a harmless portrait. He recalled seeing nothing unusual as he clicked the shutter. But when he reviewed the negatives later, he described a creeping sensation. The children's expressions seemed off, their eyes not looking at the camera, but at something behind it, or rather something within the photographer's own space. One child's hand appeared slightly raised, as if responding to an invisible touch. The photographer later admitted he felt a cold presence in the room whenever he tried to examine the photos. Local lore began to describe the farmhouse not merely as a home, but as a space where the invisible could interact with the visible. Researchers collecting testimonies found a consistent thread. Whenever an outsider attempted to record the children, the hand, or something acting through it, would appear on film, sometimes reaching into the frame in ways that defied physics. A small child might be leaning over a table, yet the hand would appear in mid-air, fingers brushing the table's edge as if it had just lifted something unseen. Psychologists and paranormal researchers debated the implications. Could the hand exist independently of the children, extending its reach through photographs? Was it some kind of tethered consciousness, aware not only of the children's perception, but of anyone who attempted to document them? The theories ranged from spiritual guardianship to malevolent influence, but no one could explain why the hand's actions were almost always subtle, almost protective, rather than outright harmful. Then came the most disturbing detail. The family's descendants, speaking decades later, recalled that even strangers who never interacted with the children in person sometimes reported uneasy feelings while handling the photographs. Some described sudden chills, hairs standing on end, or the sense of being watched. One archivist noted a faint impression of fingers on a photo envelope, tiny indentations that matched the shape of the hand in the original photograph. It was as if the hand itself was aware that it was being observed and wanted to leave a message. Even the children seemed to understand this intuitively. In letters preserved by the family, the youngest child reportedly begged the parents not to let anyone else take pictures. "It will follow them. It will reach them like it reaches me, whether this was imagination or a genuine warning. The statement echoed the consistent reports of others who had seen or attempted to photograph the family. The hand was no longer limited to the physical space of the farmhouse. Through the act of observation, through the very medium of photography, it could interact beyond its original frame. Some theorists suggest this is why the family eventually stopped all photographic activity. Every new image was a risk, not just to the children, but to anyone who might view it. The hand, in effect, had become an agent, silent, patient, almost sentient, and it was learning. Every exposure, every attempt to record it only strengthened its presence and refined its influence over the children, and possibly anyone who dared to look. This was not just a family's secret anymore. It was a phenomenon that reached outward, touching the lives of those who tried to document it, subtly reminding them that some things in the world are not meant to be seen. We will explore the chilling events that followed when the children themselves began to interact voluntarily with the hand, and why those moments blurred the line between innocence and dread. For years, the youngest child had been reluctant to speak about the hand. At first, it was described as a fleeting presence, a chill, a faint touch, a hand that seemed to linger at the edge of awareness. But as time went on, and as the child grew older, something unexpected happened. They began to reach out, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and interaction that blurred the lines between curiosity and compulsion. Family letters describe nights when the child would sit in the dim glow of a lamp, eyes fixed on an empty corner of the room. They would stretch out a hand, whispering softly as if in conversation, "I know you're there. I see you. You can hold me, or I can hold you. Just don't leave." The words, though innocent in appearance, carry a weight that suggests an understanding far beyond what one would expect from a child of that age. Psychologists who later reviewed these accounts were both fascinated and disturbed. Children are naturally imaginative, and yet the consistency of the descriptions, coupled with the visible effects on their environment, such as doors creaking, cold drafts forming, and objects subtly moving, hinted at something else entirely, something beyond imagination. The child wasn't merely fantasizing, they were interacting.
The child was asked to draw what they saw in the corner of their bedroom. Instead of a figure, the drawing consisted solely of an elongated hand, fingers splayed and reaching. Beneath it, scribbled in the child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "Don't let go." The implications are terrifying. The hand was not a passive entity. It was aware, persistent, and capable of shaping the child's behavior. And as the child's interactions grew more frequent, so did subtle signs that the hand might influence others, not just the child it clung to. By the time the family relocated, the child's relationship with the hand had become almost symbiotic. They needed it for comfort, guidance, and perhaps even a sense of safety. Yet outsiders, viewing the phenomenon through photographs or hearing the accounts later, understood only part of the truth. This was a presence that demanded attention, and in return it required a bond that once formed could never truly be broken. We'll uncover the terrifying consequences that befell those who tried to interfere with the hand, and why the family eventually chose complete isolation over risking another encounter. The hand wasn't content to remain a private matter, confined to one child or one family. Over time, anyone who attempted to interfere, document, or even question it directly seemed to invite subtle but unmistakable consequences. Family letters, witness accounts, and town lore all point to a consistent pattern. Attempts to disrupt the hand's presence rarely ended well. The first recorded incident occurred within weeks of the original photograph. A visiting cousin, curious and skeptical, tried to playfully grab the youngest child's hand as they sat near the fireplace. According to the mother's journal, the child jerked back violently, screaming, "Don't touch it, you'll make it angry." Shortly afterward, the cousin became ill with a high fever that lasted for days. Doctors found no cause, and the episode was dismissed as coincidence, but the family never forgot the warning.
Another event involved a neighbor who had seen the viral photograph decades later. Determined to investigate, he attempted to photograph the farmhouse through a window. The camera jammed, then spontaneously developed the film incorrectly, producing strange streaks resembling fingers across each frame. That night, the man reported feeling persistent cold spots on his skin, as though tiny hands were brushing along his arms. When he returned home, he discovered inexplicable scratches along his doorframe, small, uneven, and eerily similar to finger marks. Even more disturbing were accounts from family friends who tried to counsel the child away from the hand. The child, who had developed a sort of rapport with the presence, began to act strangely. Sleep became irregular, appetite diminished. At times they would sit silently staring at an empty corner, hands extended in anticipation. Family letters described nights when the child's arms would tremble uncontrollably, seemingly reacting to an unseen pull, as if the hand was asserting its presence over the child's will. Researchers analyzing these accounts have suggested several theories. Some posit that the hand operates like a tethered consciousness, seeking attention and attachment, and that any attempt to sever the bond triggers a kind of defensive response. Others propose that the hand exists partially outside conventional time and space, reacting unpredictably when humans attempt to manipulate or observe it. Yet no explanation fully accounts for the combination of physical evidence, behavioral changes, and photographic anomalies that accompany interference. The consequences weren't always violent or dramatic, but they were consistent. Any attempt to interrupt the hand's interaction caused disturbances, illness, emotional distress, or subtle environmental changes. Doors would slam, objects would shift, and a persistent sense of being watched would follow both the child and the interferer. Even distant relatives, aware of the situation only through letters, claimed to feel inexplicable unease whenever they revisited photographs or read descriptions of the hand. By the time the family decided to relocate, the pattern had become undeniable. They understood, instinctively, that the hand could not be ignored, restrained, or reasoned with. Its presence demanded respect, and violation of that unwritten law came at a cost. The choice became clear: total isolation, away from cameras, neighbors, and curiosity. Only in isolation could the child maintain a semblance of safety, though never complete freedom. Yet the hand's influence didn't end with distance. Correspondence from family members revealed that even after moving, subtle disturbances followed them. Items would vanish and reappear, shadows would shift at the edge of vision, and on several occasions, the youngest child would awaken with small, cold indentations along their fingers and wrists, marks that seemed to echo the hand's original presence. The family came to a haunting realization: the hand could not be fought, ignored, or controlled. Any attempt to resist it only reinforced its hold. Its existence demanded acknowledgement, interaction, and perhaps even submission. It was no longer just a curiosity captured in a photograph. It was a force, a quiet, persistent entity capable of asserting its will whenever someone overstepped, no matter how innocent the intent. The strange events surrounding the family and the mysterious hand were not isolated incidents. As researchers delved deeper into the history of the county, patterns emerged, patterns that suggested the phenomenon had existed long before the family moved into the farmhouse. In towns, small rural communities, and even isolated farms across the region, historical accounts described inexplicable presences, phantom touches, and objects moving on their own. In almost all cases, children were the ones most affected.
One historian uncovered a diary from a local minister dated to the late 1800s. He wrote about several families in the area who reported children being held by invisible hands at night. The entries were brief but consistent. Children would awaken screaming, claiming to feel fingers gripping theirs. Furniture would shift,
and cold spots would linger as if an unseen occupant had been present. The minister's diary concluded with a cryptic note: "We do not punish what cannot be seen, yet we fear it." Other reports, preserved in family letters and small-town newspapers, described similar occurrences. A child vanished from one farmstead after claiming that an invisible hand had called them to the woods. On another property, siblings swore that a spectral hand touched them while playing near an abandoned barn, leaving faint bruises that healed slowly but bore no medical explanation. Photographs taken during these times occasionally revealed anomalies, blurred figures, extra hands, and shadows inconsistent with light sources. The farmhouse in the photograph was now understood as part of a larger, recurring phenomenon. It was as though the land itself, or something tied to it, acted as a conduit for this unseen presence. Children, sensitive and curious, became the primary points of contact, and photographs seemed to serve as a bridge, allowing the entity to interact with both the physical and observed worlds. Researchers began calling the phenomenon the grasping presence, a term meant to convey both its persistent nature and its focus on tactile interaction. Unlike conventional hauntings, the grasping presence did not manifest as malevolent violence. Instead, it required acknowledgement, connection, and attention. Its influence grew stronger whenever it was observed, and attempts to sever that connection through photography, interference, or refusal often triggered unpredictable reactions. The family in the original photograph, now fully aware of these patterns, had little choice. Isolation became their only option. By withdrawing from neighbors, cameras, and observers, they minimized the risk of triggering the hand's influence over others. Yet even in isolation, the youngest child continued to interact with the hand, forging a bond that was both protective and perilous. Letters described late nights filled with whispered conversations, silent gestures, and an unspoken understanding between child and presence. The phenomenon's persistence across decades and generations raised unsettling questions. Was the grasping presence tied to specific children? Did it attach to families or locations? Could it learn over time, adapting to those who encountered it? The evidence suggested yes. Even the original photograph captured more than a moment in time. It recorded the hand's first known interaction with the child, a single tether that would extend across decades and reach beyond the physical frame. Some theorists proposed that the entity existed in a liminal state, part spirit, part energy, partly conscious, and partly reactive. Its touch was rarely violent, but always influential, shaping behavior, perception, and emotion. The longer the connection persisted, the more difficult it became to resist. And in the case of the farmhouse family, this meant that ordinary life, even in distant locations, remained subtly dictated by a presence they could neither see nor fully understand. The historical records offered a chilling conclusion. The hand in the photograph was not an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a recurring pattern spanning centuries, a quiet but insistent force that targeted children, interacted through touch, and demanded acknowledgement. And for those who ignored the warnings or attempted to intervene, the consequences could ripple across generations. Next, we'll uncover the fate of the child as they grew into adulthood, and why even away from the farmhouse, the hand's presence continued to shape their life in ways no one could explain. The youngest child from the photograph didn't simply leave the farmhouse behind. They carried the hand with them, invisible yet persistent as they grew into adolescence. While the family hoped that distance would diminish its influence, the presence adapted. Letters and diaries from the family suggest that the hand maintained a connection, subtle yet undeniable, shaping not only the child's perception but their daily reality. At school, the child often appeared distracted, gazing at corners of the classroom that seemed empty to others. Teachers initially attributed it to imagination or shyness. Friends would sometimes feel a faint pressure if they sat near the child, as though a hand, too light to belong to anyone, brushed against them. The child never admitted to causing this, rather it was described as an involuntary response. In other words, the hand reached out and the child reacted. Letters describe the child's growing understanding of the presence. Unlike before, when fear dominated, the adolescent began to negotiate with the hand. The journals are chilling in their matter-of-fact tone. I let it touch me, but only when I allow it. I speak when it speaks. I move when it moves. We are partners, but I decide how close. Despite this apparent control, subtle evidence suggests that the hand's influence extended into more than physical contact. Dreams became vivid, almost prescient, and a heightened sense of awareness accompanied the child wherever they went. Even mundane interactions sometimes seemed to shift around an unseen force. At home, the family noticed more overt effects. Objects would move slightly when the child was alone. Doors would creak without wind. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the evenings. Most unnerving were letters describing moments when the child's hand appeared to react on its own, fingers curling, tapping, or pressing against surfaces in ways that seemed deliberate. It was as if the hand were practicing its agency, learning the environment, and anticipating actions before they occurred. Despite attempts to live a normal life, the adolescent could never fully detach. Even distant relatives noticed that the child seemed different, more perceptive, often distant, and unnervingly aware of things others could not perceive. Friends recalled a sense of weight or pressure in rooms when the child entered, almost imperceptible yet unmistakable. Some claimed it felt as though the hand had extended itself beyond the child, reaching into the space around them.
Psychologists reviewing these accounts later speculated on the psychological toll. The child's development was marked by anxiety, hyper-awareness, and a deep-seated sense of responsibility toward the unseen. Yet the child never described the hand as malevolent, only insistent, curious, and demanding of acknowledgement. It seemed to crave interaction as much as it provided reassurance. Letters also indicate attempts to teach the hand boundaries. The child reportedly instructed the presence not to interfere with school, friends, or meals. The hand appeared to comply, adjusting its touch and timing according to the child's rules, but it never left. Even as the child reached adulthood, the bond persisted. A tether formed long before the child could understand consent, choice, or autonomy. The family, aware that the hand's reach extended beyond their immediate environment, continued to avoid photographs, neighbors, and anyone who might accidentally draw the presence's attention. Isolation remained the only protective strategy, but even distance could not fully sever the connection. By adulthood, it was clear. The hand was more than a memory or a curiosity. It was a presence, a companion, and a force that had shaped the child's life in subtle, irrevocable ways. And in its quiet persistence, it was clear that it had plans, or at least patterns, beyond the child's understanding. We'll explore the broader implications, how this unseen hand may have influenced other families in the county, and why the phenomenon might still exist today, waiting for the next observer.
The family's story, as chilling as it was only one thread in a much larger tapestry of unexplained occurrences in the county. Local historians, folklorists, and paranormal researchers began to piece together decades of accounts, photographs, and family letters, revealing a pattern that spanned generations. The hand in the original photograph was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a recurring phenomenon that touched multiple families, often centered around children and young adolescents. Reports from other households described remarkably similar experiences. Children would awaken at night claiming to feel a hand brushing their skin or holding theirs, sometimes cold, sometimes warm, but always persistent. Families who attempted to photograph the children discovered anomalies, fingers, shadows, or faint outlines of limbs that seemed to interact with the subjects in impossible ways. Even in homes far removed from the original farmhouse, observers described feelings of being watched or a pressure on their own hands, as if the presence could extend itself beyond physical proximity. Historians traced these occurrences back over a century. One account, recorded in a local newspaper from the early 1900s, detailed a family whose children refused to touch certain objects for fear that invisible fingers might linger there. Photographs taken at family gatherings showed unexplained smudges and extra limbs in the negatives, and letters described the children developing habits of avoiding open doors and mirrors, as though the hand, or something like it, could reach through any reflection. Folklore from the region offers another layer of context. The presence was often referred to as a watching hand or grasping spirit, an entity that demanded acknowledgement. While the descriptions varied, the consistent thread was that this presence attached itself to the young, persisted across generations, and interacted most strongly through touch, or at least the suggestion of touch. Legends claimed that those who ignored it risked sickness, misfortune, or psychological disturbance. Those who acknowledged it might form a bond, gaining heightened awareness, but also carrying a lifelong tether to the entity. Researchers who examined the phenomenon noted a disturbing characteristic. The hand seemed to learn. Each documented interaction, each photographic exposure, and each human acknowledgement appeared to strengthen its presence. Once a child engaged willingly, or even subconsciously, the entity adapted, understanding boundaries, timing, and the limits of human perception. The hand was persistent but patient, capable of waiting for decades if necessary, and choosing its moments with calculated subtlety. In the case of the family from the farmhouse, the influence was contained within the family unit, but the possibility of exposure remained ever present. Letters and accounts reveal that the family lived in a constant state of vigilance, avoiding social interactions, refusing photographs, and carefully regulating the youngest child's environment. Even moving miles away did not sever the presence. The hand adapted to its new surroundings, manifesting in small, often imperceptible ways, but always reminding the child and anyone nearby that its awareness extended beyond the original space. The implication is chilling. The hand may still exist today, lurking in corners of the world, invisible yet attentive, waiting for the next child, the next observer, or the next photograph to extend its influence. For families in the county, this legacy became cautionary. Photographs were limited, children were taught to avoid unexplainable touches, and curiosity about the unexplained was tempered by fear. The phenomenon persisted quietly, waiting, patient and deliberate. And the photograph that started it all? It was more than an image. It was a warning, a record, and a beacon. Evidence of something unseen that has existed for decades, perhaps centuries, always observing, always reaching, always waiting. We'll explore the unsettling question, could the hand still be influencing the world today, and what might happen if someone dared to interact with it once again? Even decades after the original photograph, the hand's presence remains a topic of unease and speculation. Though the family moved far from the farmhouse, their story and the image resurfaced repeatedly, shared in forums, private archives, and research circles. Experts and amateurs alike have examined it, but one truth becomes painfully clear. The hand does not obey distance, time, or human expectation. Once acknowledged, it lingers. Once seen, it persists. The descendants of the original family report that the youngest child, now an adult, still senses the presence. It manifests subtly, an inexplicable chill, a faint pressure on the hand when alone, or the uncanny sense of being watched. Sometimes photographs taken of the child decades later reveal faint shapes reminiscent of the original hand, almost imperceptible but undeniably present to those who know where to look. Every image is a silent reminder that the entity has not forgotten, nor has it relinquished its connection.
Researchers speculate that the hand functions as a tether, a link between the unseen and the visible world. Children, particularly those who are sensitive, act as points of contact, and the bond strengthens with acknowledgement. Interactions are persistent but controlled, rarely aggressive unless the connection is threatened. The family learned this the hard way. Attempts to sever the bond provoke reactions, subtle or pronounced, that demonstrate the entity's awareness and patience. It is deliberate, it is intelligent, and it does not forget. Even outside the family, the photograph's circulation raises chilling questions. Could viewing the image invite attention? Could someone who studies it too closely experience a brush with the same presence? Historical accounts from the county suggest yes. People who have interacted or photographed other children affected by the phenomenon describe faint sensations of touch, coldness, or an intuitive feeling of being observed. It is as if the hand extends beyond its immediate connection, capable of influencing those who acknowledge its existence, whether they wish to or not. The hand's influence is neither purely malevolent nor benign. Letters from the family indicate a complex relationship. The child found comfort in its presence, a companion in the quiet moments of isolation. Yet that comfort came at a cost, a life subtly dictated by an unseen force, constrained by the constant awareness of something watching, waiting, and capable of reaching. It is a bond that cannot be broken, a tether that endures across years, distances, and generations. What happens if someone dares to interfere, photograph, or touch it today? The pattern is clear. Interference brings risk, often psychological or physical. Photography invites distortion, anomalies, and inexplicable sensations. Observation alone may be enough to establish a connection that cannot be undone. The hand's persistence demonstrates a principle as old as the phenomenon itself. Acknowledgement invites attachment, and attachment demands respect. The farmhouse may now be abandoned and the children long grown, but the legacy of the hand endures. It is not bound by the physical limits of walls, furniture, or land. It exists in photographs, memories, and the consciousness of those who have interacted with it. To underestimate it is to risk attention. To ignore it is impossible, and to try to escape it is to misunderstand its nature entirely. The chilling reality is this: the hand will continue to reach, silently observing, patiently waiting. Someday, some person, perhaps a child, perhaps a curious observer, may encounter it again, and when they do, they will realize that what began as a simple photograph was never just an image. It was a warning, a record, a bridge between what is seen and what is unseen. We will confront the ultimate question: what is the hand? Why does it exist? And could it ever truly be understood or escaped? After tracing the history of the hand, from the faded photograph to decades of family accounts, one undeniable truth emerges. It is not merely a trick of light, nor a child's imagination, nor a quirk of early photography.
The hand exists, and in some form it has persisted for generations, adapting, observing, and maintaining a presence that is both intimate and inescapable. Psychologists, folklorists, and paranormal researchers have struggled to classify it. Some suggest it is a liminal entity, existing between dimensions, visible only to those capable of perceiving subtle energies. Others propose it is an intelligence tied to the human need for connection, one that latches on innocence, curiosity, and attention. Whatever its origin, one fact remains undeniable. Once the hand makes contact, the bond it creates cannot be fully undone. Even today, the photograph circulates quietly online and in archives. It serves as a record and a warning. Those who study it too closely sometimes report inexplicable sensations, a faint pressure on the hand, chills, or a creeping sense of being watched. It is a subtle invitation, or perhaps a test. Will you acknowledge it or turn away? And in either case, the hand notices, the hand waits, the hand endures. The family's strategy was simple: isolation, vigilance, and careful avoidance of triggers like photography or public attention. Yet the hand's persistence challenges all attempts to control. It demonstrates a principle both simple and terrifying. Some forces cannot be ignored, escaped, or understood fully. Interaction is inevitable once acknowledged, and acknowledgement creates connection. Ultimately, the hand remains an enigma. Its origins are unknown, its motivations are unclear, and its persistence is unnerving. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps its existence is not meant to be explained in human terms. It is a silent observer, a patient presence, and a reminder that the world contains more than what can be seen or measured. The photograph of the family, once considered innocent, now stands as a testament, a single hand captured forever, hovering beside a child who noticed something invisible yet real, a hand that continues to exist, reaching, observing, and waiting perhaps for the next moment, the next observer, or the next unwitting witness to glance closely and feel its subtle presence. And the truth is inescapable. Some things, once acknowledged, never let go.